I still remember the sound of the director's office door clicking shut behind me. Not loud, not dramatic, just soft and final, like a chapter closing. My name is Malcolm Yates. I'm 64 years old, and until last Tuesday, I was a senior curator at the Heritage Institute of Natural Culture in Albany, New York. 19 years I spent there, longer than some of our archive paintings have been on display. Nora Duval, our new director, is 37, polished like a showroom exhibit. Her heels barely made a sound on the limestone floor, but her words? They echoed. Malcolm, you've done admirable work over the years, she began, smiling in a way that made my spine tighten. But the Institute is moving toward a new phase of cultural accessibility and digital modernization. And frankly, she leaned forward just a hair, her voice softening like she was delivering a compliment. Your methods are, well, they're a bit too analog for the pace we're setting. Too analog. I nodded. Didn't argue. I'd learned over the years that when a decision is packaged in HR-approved language like organizational realignment, there's no point pushing back. The pink slip had already been printed. It wasn't a conversation, it was a courtesy. They offered me a generous, early retirement package and a reference letter that would sit neatly in a drawer until the day I died. I packed my things that afternoon. My office wasn't big, but it was mine. Framed photos of me and Eric, my late husband. The one from Paris in '98 where the wind made his curls stand up like wild grass, went into a padded envelope. So did the fountain pen he gave me when I got promoted to lead curator. Mont Blanc, navy blue casing, gold trim. Still had a scratch across the clip from the day I dropped it after our first exhibit launch. I'd never fixed it. As I reached for a set of leather-bound acquisition logs, I heard the shuffle of someone hovering in the doorway. I turned and saw Layla, one of the junior archivists, 20-something, quiet, thoughtful. Her eyes were glassy, and she held a cardboard box of packing tissue like it was an offering. I'm sorry, she said quietly. This place won't be the same without you. I gave her a small smile, one I didn't feel. Places like this change all the time. That's the nature of culture, Layla. She wiped a tear quickly with the sleeve of her cardigan and helped me box the last of my belongings. As we walked toward the exit, I passed the exhibit prep room, where, for the past few months, I'd noticed some strange items being moved in. Modern sculptures with no documentation. Storage boxes that bypassed accession entirely. Budgets being redirected to consultants I'd never met. I had flagged some of it in my private logs. Quietly, carefully, but I hadn't said a word, not yet. I stopped at the front doors, took one last look at the atrium, then stepped out into the cold spring air. I didn't feel angry. Not yet. But I did feel certain. Something at the Institute wasn't right. And I hadn't spent 19 years curating truth just to let it be erased. It started about 6 months before Nora gave me the boot. The first thing that caught my eye was an invoice. Not unusual on its own. Except this one was for over $17,000 to a company I'd never heard of, Culture Sync Digitization. Supposedly, they were consulting on modernizing our collection database. Except I had been the one overseeing digital records for years, and I'd never seen a single person from that firm step foot inside the Institute. I flagged it in a private document I kept on an old external drive, one Eric and I used to share for travel photos and tax records. It wasn't connected to the network, and that's how I liked it. Quiet. Safe. At first, I told myself it was probably just a new vendor. Maybe someone from marketing had looped them in. But then the invoices kept coming. Monthly. Higher each time. No deliverables, no reports, no access logs showing any external consultant even touched the system. The second red flag came from the acquisitions log. A bronze statue arrived from a private donor who, apparently, wanted anonymity. That wasn't new. Some people don't want their names in display brochures. What was new was the appraisal. It listed the piece at nearly $400,000. Absurd for something unprovenanced and without academic significance. I checked our internal notes, only to find the accession number led nowhere. No origin, no donor correspondence. Just a line in the database and a big fat price tag. When I brought it up informally to Jasper Lynn, the deputy director Nora had hired 3 months into her tenure, he waved it off with a grin. We're future-facing now, Malcolm. Appraisal is about perception as much as provenance. He was 30, maybe. Wore designer sneakers with his suit. Every time he said the word innovation, he gestured like he was presenting a TED Talk. His background? A self-branded digital transformation guru who'd worked with boutique museums in cities like Austin and San Diego. I tried looking deeper into his credentials. Most of the institutions he listed were now defunct or had merged into unrelated firms. Still, I kept my mouth shut. I wasn't ready to make accusations without facts. So I started logging everything. Each strange acquisition. Each inflated appraisal. Every time a consulting invoice arrived without an actual project attached to it. I kept a side-by-side chart, what the Institute claimed to acquire and what I could confirm physically existed. The gaps widened each week. And through it all, I kept Eric's words close. Curate the truth, even when no one's looking, he used to say, scribbled once in a note he left me tucked inside a lunchbox during an exhausting week of exhibition prep. That phrase had become a kind of compass, a reminder that truth doesn't make noise. It waits, quietly, for someone to notice it. By the time fall rolled in, I had a folder of discrepancies thick enough to give a board member a stroke. But I didn't share it. Not yet. I knew something was wrong, deeply wrong, but if I was going to expose it, I needed more than suspicions and spreadsheet oddities. I needed the full picture. So I waited. And I watched. And I kept curating. Not just artifacts, this time, but facts. A museum of secrets, slowly coming into view. After I left the Institute, I waited a few days before reaching out to Fiona Delaney. She'd been on the board longer than I'd been a curator, a retired cultural preservationist with a soft spot for historical accuracy and handwritten ledgers. Years ago, she'd once called me the last real steward of authenticity after I gave a talk on 19th century botanical collections. I thought if anyone would listen, it would be her. We met at a quiet cafe near the old textile museum, just a few blocks from the Institute. Fiona arrived 10 minutes late, wearing a blue scarf I recognized from board retreats years ago. She gave me a brief hug, more perfunctory than warm. I heard what happened, she said gently, but her eyes darted to her phone as she spoke. I appreciate you making time, I said. I've noticed some irregularities at the Institute over the past few months. Fiona stiffened. Irregularities. In acquisitions and appraisals. Certain expenses. I have records. She set down her cup. Malcolm, I understand this has been a difficult transition. But the board is fully aligned behind Nora and Jasper's vision. They've brought in incredible energy and funding opportunities we couldn't have dreamed of 5 years ago. I blinked. With all due respect, Fiona, energy isn't the same as ethics. Her tone sharpened. Malcolm, you've had a distinguished career. But it's time for a new chapter. Let's not let resentment cloud that legacy. That stung more than I expected. I realized then she wasn't going to help. She wasn't even going to ask to see what I had. I walked out into the parking lot feeling smaller than I had in years. 2 days later, a letter arrived from the Institute's legal department. It was worded carefully, lots of phrases like post-employment confidentiality obligations and preservation of institutional reputation. But the meaning was crystal clear. Speak up, and we'll bury you in legal threats. They weren't just brushing me off. They were prepping to silence me. And then, that night, I got a text from Layla. They're rewriting parts of the archive database. Some records are missing. Jasper restricted editing access to just 3 admins. Even I can't see accession logs anymore. I stared at the message for a long time. Layla wouldn't text me unless she was scared. And if records were disappearing, the very records I'd spent years preserving, then the Institute wasn't just ignoring the truth. They were actively erasing it. That's when it clicked. This wasn't just about modernizing. It wasn't even about me being too analog. They were getting rid of me because I still remembered where the bodies were buried. Because I was the kind of man who kept copies. The kind who asked too many questions and didn't look away when numbers didn't add up. Well, I wasn't looking away now. Not anymore. Layla suggested we meet at the Cornerstone Cafe, the one that stayed open until midnight and always smelled like cinnamon and printer ink. We picked a booth in the back, where the noise from the espresso machine drowned out anything short of a scream. She looked different out of the archive, a less guarded. Still had her tote bag with the little enamel pin that read, "Metadata matters," though. That made me smile, in a sad way. I shouldn't even be talking to you, she said, pulling the knit cap off her head and tucking it into her coat. They're watching everyone. I sipped my tea and waited. They told the staff you'd been let go after a cataloging issue, she continued. I was flicking up to mine. Something about discrepancies in your logs. The implication is that you, I don't know, mishandled records. I felt my jaw clench. That's what they're telling people? She nodded. Whispers mostly. Nothing official. But people believe it. They're scared to ask questions. They think the system might flag them. That new digital platform? Layla nodded. Everything's been migrated. And now only Jasper and 2 IT admins can access the back end. Everyone else is locked out or reduced to view-only access. Even department leads. That's not a system upgrade, I said. That's a power grab. She looked around, lowered her voice. I tried to pull up the donor file for the bronze statue you always questioned. Gone. Not just restricted, gone. Like it never existed. I exhaled slowly, leaning back. They're rewriting history. Literally. I don't know what to do, Malcolm. Her voice cracked just slightly. I wanted to say something, but what if they do to me what they did to you? For a moment, we sat in silence, the low hum of milk frothing filling the air. Then I asked, calm and deliberate, do you remember the analog backups? Layla blinked. You mean the off-site ledgers? Yes. The paper audit logs. Before the migration. We used to rotate them out every quarter, kept in that fireproof cabinet at the old storage annex in Colony. She nodded slowly. I thought those were shredded after the last policy update. They were supposed to be, I said. But I never signed off on the destruction slips. Not all of them. Layla's eyes widened. You think they're still there? I think it's the only chance we have of proving what's changed. She sat back, looking both terrified and relieved. You planned for this. I planned for human error, I said softly. But maybe that's the same thing. Layla pulled her scarf tighter around her neck and looked out the window. They don't know I'm talking to you, she said. Let's keep it that way, I replied. For now. And just like that, I had an ally, unsteady, scared, but still standing. And maybe that was enough. The Colony branch library had 6 public computers and a printer that only worked on the second try. I picked the farthest terminal from the front desk, set down a flash drive, and opened a clean session. No sign-ins, no personal logins. Just public access and an hour timer blinking in the corner of the screen. The analog backups had confirmed what I already suspected. Entire appraisals had been replaced, donor records scrubbed, acquisition chains broken. But I needed more. I needed a trail, something that couldn't be shrugged off as clerical error. So I started digging. The first lead came from a vendor receipt tied to one of the stranger acquisitions, a lacquered wood carving from Digitera Foundation. I remembered the name because it was on at least 4 other items in the new wing Nora was so proud of. I ran a business registry search. The Digitera Foundation had been incorporated just 7 weeks before Jasper's hiring. No phone number, no physical office. Just a registered mailing address to a co-working space in New Rochelle and a trustee name I didn't recognize, a shell entity if I ever saw one. Next, I followed the money. The Institute's public annual report listed Digitera as a strategic cultural partner, supposedly providing rare artifacts for exhibition through private grants. But in every case, the item in question had no chain of custody before its arrival. No international shipping manifests, no customs forms, no insurance evaluations. Just glossy brochures and pre-written press releases. One piece, a so-called pre-Columbian ceremonial mirror, had been listed at 6 figures. But the analog backup showed it originally entered the archive as provenance unverified, temporary loan. The digital record now showed it as a permanent gift via Digitera, appraised at $280,000. That was laundering. Cultural laundering. The artifact equivalent of washing dirty money through fake provenance. I dug further into the trustee listed on Digitera's paperwork. A man named Philip Hirsch. No photos online. No LinkedIn. But he had been listed as a board member at a startup Nora co-founded 6 years ago, Urban Canvas Labs. A failed tech meets art venture that went bankrupt after just 18 months. I felt the heat rise in my chest. Nora and Hirsch had history. And Hirsch was now funneling artifacts into the Institute through a fake foundation. Artifacts no one could verify, at prices no one could defend. And Jasper? He was the perfect middleman. Shiny credentials, no accountability, and absolutely no paper trail. I sat back in the library chair, listening to the whir of the old computer fan, letting it all settle. This wasn't mismanagement. This wasn't modernization gone too far. This was a plan. A systematic effort to rebrand the Institute while skimming from the very collections meant to educate the public. They weren't just erasing history, they were replacing it with fiction. And they were getting paid to do it. I saved every document, every business registration, every invoice. I encrypted 2 copies, one on my flash drive, one to a secure cloud account Eric and I used to share. Before I left, I sent myself an email from a burner address. Subject line, insurance policy. Because the truth was no longer enough. Not when people like Nora were building entire empires on illusions. This was a fraud operation disguised as innovation. And I just mapped out the architecture. I didn't send out accusations. I sent out questions. 3 handwritten letters, addressed personally, each one folded into a plain envelope with no return address. One went to Marjorie Bell, a retired preservationist who once chaired a committee on archival ethics. Another to Hector Ramos, a youth advocate who'd fought to bring underrepresented voices into local museums. And the third to Deshaun Booker, a community historian and probably the only board member under 50 who didn't own a boat. The letters were simple, careful. I wrote, as someone who has long respected your commitment to cultural stewardship, I wanted to share some irregularities I came across during my tenure. I'm not seeking attention or vindication. I simply believe the facts should be preserved before they're erased. Enclosed are a few examples from the record logs. I leave the rest to your judgment. No accusations. No drama. Just a whisper. Meanwhile, I met Layla again, this time, not at a cafe. We sat in my car, parked on a side street behind an elementary school, headlights off. She looked over her shoulder twice before getting in. I filed it, she said, handing me a sealed envelope. An internal complaint to HR, but routed through the anonymous reporting channel. They have to log it. And once it's logged, it forces a review. I took the envelope and placed it in the glove box without opening it. If anyone asks, I said, you never spoke to me. Layla gave a quick nod. They'll know eventually. But not before it's too late, I replied. That's the trick. I'd already gone further. That morning, I had uploaded every file, every scanned invoice, altered database log, Shell Foundation document, to a series of encrypted cloud storage accounts. Then I activated what Eric used to jokingly call our deadman switch, a program we'd built years ago to auto-email specified contacts if we hadn't checked in within a certain time frame. I set it to 72 hours. If something happened to me, the files would go to a list of watchdog journalists, federal grant agencies, and a cultural property crimes division at the Department of Justice. I wasn't just protecting the evidence anymore. I was protecting the truth from vanishing with me. Layla looked over at me. So what now? Now we wait, I said, for the complaint to get noticed, for one of the board members to call an emergency session, for someone, anyone, to realize that something at the Heritage Institute smelled wrong and that someone had already bottled the stench for review. I looked out the windshield, watching as a pair of headlights moved slowly down the road, then turned away. Layla shifted in her seat. You think they'll try to come after you? They'll try to discredit me first, I said. They already started. And if that doesn't work, then they'll panic. And panic makes people sloppy. We sat in silence a while longer. Then I handed her a flash drive. Keep this somewhere safe. If anything happens, give it to Hector Booker. In person. Layla took it with both hands like it was glass. This wasn't revenge. It wasn't even about getting my job back. It was about the one thing that had always mattered to me more than any title or paycheck. The integrity of the story we told the public, the truth we claimed to protect. And I wasn't going to let it disappear. The emergency board meeting was scheduled for 9 a.m. on a Thursday. By 10, the institute was swarming with people who didn't belong. 3 plainclothed investigators moved briskly through the lobby, escorted by security. One of them carried a portable scanner. Another had a locked briefcase handcuffed to his wrist. They went straight to the archives. From across the plaza, I watched it all unfold from a bench beneath the sycamore trees, the same bench where I used to eat lunch when Eric would stop by with sandwiches. A paper cup of tea steamed in my hand as the spring wind rustled the museum's flag, still fluttering under the institute's seal. I didn't need to be inside to know what was happening. Layla's complaint had triggered a mandatory internal review, and my letters had done the rest. At least 2 board members, Marjorie and Booker, I later heard, had cross-referenced my logs with their own copies of donor summaries and appraisals. It didn't take long before they found the holes. And once the holes were obvious, everything else unraveled fast. Nora tried to play it calm. When the investigators asked for access to the back-end database, she claimed it was under maintenance. Jasper, meanwhile, was nowhere to be found. By noon, the IT lead had unlocked the system under order of the board. That's when the full scope came to light. Dozens of acquisitions lacked proper origin documentation. Several grants, supposedly tied to donor events and education outreach, had no sign-ins, no reports, no attendees. The Shell Foundation? Already flagged by the state as under investigation for improper filings. Nora's tone shifted quickly from firm to defensive. She blamed legacy systems, then clerical confusion, then finally a breakdown in internal communications. But her face cracked when one of the investigators pulled out a printed copy of an original analog accession form and laid it next to the altered digital version. There was no recovery after that. By 2 p.m., she was escorted out of the building. Not in handcuffs, not yet, but in silence, flanked by board members who didn't meet her eyes. I watched from my bench as she passed the museum's front doors one last time. The automatic glass doors slid open with a hiss, and she walked out into a world that no longer believed her version of the story. My phone buzzed in my pocket. Layla, audit's begun. You did it. I didn't reply right away. Just stared at the museum's facade, the place I'd devoted 19 years to protecting, preserving, and believing in. People passed by me on the plaza, some tourists, some students, none of them knowing that a cultural reckoning was happening just yards away. That behind those brick walls, the house of glass had finally shattered. I sipped my tea and closed my eyes for a moment. Not in triumph. Not in bitterness. Just peace. Fiona called me the following week. Her voice was clipped at first, formal, like a voicemail you leave when you're not sure the other person wants to hear from you. Malcolm, it's Fiona. I wanted to say, well, I owe you an apology. I didn't say anything. I let her keep going. I was wrong to dismiss you. We all were. The audit team's findings are substantial. And frankly, we're going to need your help putting things back together. I agreed to meet, not because I wanted to be back, but because I still cared too damn much to let them clean it up with more consultants and PR spin. So I walked through those glass doors one last time. This time, no one met me with a letter. No security badge deactivation. No pitying glances from junior staff. Just Layla standing at the front, holding a clipboard and 2 coffees. You really came back, she said, half in disbelief. Only to supervise, I replied. Think of me as a temporary janitor with a title. The board brought me in as an advisor during the post-crisis transition. I helped them reconstruct the original archive logs from analog backups, walked the auditors through procurement procedures, and made it very clear that any new digitization policy would include transparency, chain of custody, and read only snapshots with quarterly checks. No more hiding data behind dashboards no one understood. When they asked me to stay longer, maybe even return to my old post, I declined. I'm not interested in stepping backward, I said. I'm interested in helping someone else step forward. That someone was Layla. I spent the next month training her, not just in policy, but in judgment. How to spot an appraisal that didn't smell right. How to ask the hard questions without sounding like a rebel. How to document things quietly, just in case no one believed you when it mattered most. She picked it up fast. The last time we met in the curator's office, I handed her Eric's old Mont Blanc pen. I want you to have this, I said. Malcolm. It's just a pen, but it reminds me of what this job really is. Which is storytelling. But honest. She nodded, and I knew she understood. A few weeks later, I stepped away for good. No farewell speech, no press release, no retirement luncheon with awkward small talk. Just a quiet exit through the staff doors and a slow walk down the block to where my old Buick was parked. I moved into a small cottage near the Pine Hollow Forest Reserve. Nothing fancy, just enough space for my books, some art, and a desk where I could still write when the mood struck. A month after I settled in, the local library put out a call for volunteers to help catalog a backlog of historical town records. I signed up the next day. Now I spend a few hours each week surrounded by dusty ledgers, handwritten census pages, and brittle photographs of long-forgotten parades. No committees, no egos. Just the past, waiting patiently to be remembered. And that's enough. The title's gone. But the legacy? That's still there, on paper, in ink, in people like Layla. And in the quiet certainty that the truth, when curated with care, never really disappears.